I woke up to the rhythmic beeping of machines and the soft shuffle of nurses' shoes down the hall. My throat was dry, my head heavy, and my arms ached from the IVs. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it hit me. The hospital, the surgery, the damn infection that nearly took my life. It had been nearly 3 weeks since they admitted me. I was in and out of consciousness for most of it, floating in that strange limbo between pain and sleep. When I finally began to regain full awareness, I was told I'd had complications, a second surgery, a brief stint in the ICU. They told me I was lucky to be alive. I wasn't sure I agreed. On the 4th day of being semi-lucid, a social worker named Linda came into my room with a clipboard. She was polite, warm, and clearly nervous. That made me nervous. "I just need to go over a few things with you," she said gently. "Some paperwork we received regarding your residence." "My residence?" I blinked, still foggy. "What do you mean?" Linda hesitated. Then she pulled out a document. I recognized the address immediately. My house. My home for over 30 years. The place I raised my son, Brandon. The place where my husband died. The garden I loved. The kitchen I remodeled with my own damn hands. My name was on the paper, but not where it should have been. I wasn't the owner anymore. It had been sold. I stared at the signature. Brandon's. "You're listed as having granted him power of attorney while hospitalized," Linda said softly. "We have a copy of the form. He claimed it was urgent for your medical costs and care. But the sale wasn't to pay any bills. The money went into an account under his name." I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat there, stunned, heart thudding, nausea creeping up my throat. He sold my house. While I lay in this hospital bed, fighting for my life, my own son sold the only thing I had left and didn't tell me a damn word. Later that evening, when the nurse left and the room dimmed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about every moment I'd spent sacrificing for that boy, working 2 jobs, skipping meals, missing vacations, putting him first, always. And that's when I knew something clearly. He thought I was dying, and he thought he could get away with it. But I wasn't dead, not even close, and I was going to make sure he regretted every single signature he put on that paper. By the time Brandon finally showed up at the hospital, I'd already read every line of that fraudulent document a dozen times. I had memorized the sale date, the transfer of ownership, the account number the money had gone into. Linda helped me make copies. Quietly, carefully. She said she wasn't supposed to, but I think she saw something in my face. Not desperation, something colder. When my son walked into the room, he wore that same smug smile he'd always used when he was hiding something. Like he'd forgotten how well I knew that look. His collared shirt was crisp, and he carried a little bouquet of gas station flowers. Cheap ones. "Mom," he said, setting them down on the table. "You're awake. Thank God." I just stared at him. I let the silence sit. "I've been so worried," he added. "It's been a rough couple of weeks, you know. I didn't know if you'd die." I finished for him, voice low and sharp. He froze for half a second. "No, I didn't mean it like that." I smiled, but it wasn't warm. "You didn't think I'd wake up, Brandon?" He blinked, the color draining slightly from his face. What are you talking about?" "You sold my house." He opened his mouth, closed it again. "Don't bother lying. I've seen the paperwork. I know what you did." I kept my voice steady, every word calculated. "You used a forged power of attorney. You sold the house, transferred the funds to an account under your name, and you never even called me while I was in ICU." His mouth opened again, but nothing came out. I watched him squirm. Was it worth it? I asked. Did the money feel good while you thought I was dying? He suddenly went on the defensive. Mom, listen, it's not what you think. The house needed too much work. I couldn't afford to keep it going. And your medical bills. My medical bills are covered by Medicare and supplemental insurance, Brandon. I cut in sharply. You know that. You always knew that. He flinched. I want it back, I said. You… What? He laughed nervously. Mom, the house is gone. It's sold. You can't just undo… I'm not stupid, I said, and I'm not helpless. There was a long silence between us, tension hanging in the sterile air like a storm cloud. He looked around the room, as if hoping someone would save him. Then, with a forced smile, he muttered, Look, I didn't mean to hurt you. I just thought… You thought I wouldn't survive, I finished again. He didn't deny it, and that silence told me everything. The son I raised, the boy I sacrificed everything for, had seen my coma as an opportunity, but I was awake now, and I was going to take back what was mine, piece by piece, dollar by dollar. He didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning. After Brandon left, I stared at the flowers he'd brought me. Cheap, wilted, probably grabbed at the last second to ease his guilt. I let them sit on the bedside table a while longer, then quietly dropped them into the trash. The next morning, I asked for my phone. My hands were still shaky, but I managed. I dialed a number I hadn't called in nearly 6 years, not since my husband passed. Hello? A familiar voice answered. Is this Evelyn Marshall? I asked, voice hoarse. There was a pause. Yes, who's this? It's Margaret. A beat. Margaret Dalton. Oh my God. Another pause. Are you okay? No, but I will be. Evelyn used to be our family attorney, back when we had joint savings, a house with both our names on it, and a retirement plan that hadn't yet been raided by my son's poor decisions. She'd helped us draft our wills, our trusts, everything. She was the one person I trusted who knew how all of this worked. Within 10 minutes, Evelyn was fully updated. I gave her the short version: hospitalization, forged signature, sale of the house, and my son disappearing the moment he got what he wanted. This is going to get messy, she said. I know. But if what you're saying is true, he's in serious legal trouble, financial abuse of a vulnerable adult, fraud, forgery, and if we prove you were incapacitated at the time he signed anything, he's cooked. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. I want to fight it. I want everything back, but I want it done clean, legal, no yelling matches, no Facebook drama. I want him to see what happens when you try to bury someone before they're dead. There was a long silence on her end. Then she said, I'll need every document and access to the account where the money was transferred. I already have the routing number, I said. It was on the social worker's copy. Evelyn laughed, a short, impressed sound. You're still sharp, Margaret. No, I said. I'm sharper now. I just never had a reason to use it. We agreed to meet as soon as I was discharged. In the meantime, she'd begin pulling the county property records and transaction history. If Brandon had done what I suspected, rushed the sale to a private buyer without disclosures or proper legal review, there was a very real chance we could unravel it all. After I hung up, I felt the first flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control, not revenge, not rage, just quiet, calculated control. I didn't want to destroy my son. I just wanted him to understand what he'd done. And I wanted the law, not anger, to speak for me. He thought he'd played the game. He forgot I taught him how to play in the first place. 3 days later, I signed my discharge papers. The nurse offered me a wheelchair for the exit, and I declined, politely but firmly. I hadn't stood on my own in weeks, but I wanted my son to see me walk out of that hospital. Even if every muscle ached and the damn IV bruises were still fresh on my arms. I got as far as the parking lot before I saw him. Brandon, leaning against a black SUV I didn't recognize. Not his usual beat-up truck. This one was newer, shinier, flashier. So that's where some of the money went. He waved with a smile like this was a family reunion. "Hey, Ma, ready to get home?" Home. I almost laughed. "My home, Brandon?" I asked, slowly walking up to him. "Or whoever's living in it now." He shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I know you're upset, but let's not do this out here, okay?" "I'm not upset," I replied calmly. "I'm tired. I just spent weeks fighting to live, and now I'm going to spend the next few months fighting for what's mine." He rolled his eyes. "Mom, the house is gone. You don't even have a place to go. Come on, just stay with me for a while until we figure it out." I studied his face. He really thought he could control the narrative, that if he smiled enough, called me Ma, and played the caring son, I'd just roll over. "No thanks," I said. "I have arrangements." He looked confused. "Arrangements? Where?" I didn't answer, because I wasn't staying with him. I had called an old friend from church who offered me a guest room. Quiet, clean, and most importantly, far from Brandon. He kept talking as we drove. About misunderstandings, about just trying to help. But I only half listened. I was watching the road, the shops we passed, the life I was returning to, and realizing just how much I'd let him assume I wouldn't fight back. But I wasn't the woman who sat quietly anymore. I had Evelyn working on the paperwork. I had a medical file that proved I was incapacitated during the transaction. I had his forged signature on a fake POA. And I had one more thing. Time. Because he didn't know the court date was coming. He didn't know the buyer of my house was already under review. And he didn't know that the new car, the new apartment, the fake lifestyle, all of it, was about to collapse under its own weight. The next time I saw him, I'd be sitting across from him, not next to him, in court. And I wouldn't need to raise my voice, because the truth was loud enough. It took exactly 11 days from the day I was discharged to the day he got served. I didn't deliver the papers myself, though I would have loved to watch his face. Evelyn handled it all. Quiet, professional, no dramatics. A court-appointed process server handed him the envelope right at his apartment door. Saturday morning, bright and early. I got a text from him 5 minutes later. "What the hell is this?" I didn't respond, because I didn't need to anymore. The envelope contained everything. A petition to void the sale of my home, a motion for injunctive relief to freeze the account he transferred the funds into, a formal allegation of elder financial abuse, and a list of exhibits that would make any judge raise an eyebrow. Medical records, power of attorney timestamp analysis, my ICU chart, and handwriting comparisons. It was a legal grenade, and Brandon had just pulled the pin. 3 hours later, he called. "Mom, seriously? You're suing me?" I was at Evelyn's office when the phone rang. She nodded at me to pick up and put it on speaker. "Yes," I said, calm as still water. "You're out of your mind. You're really trying to drag me through court?" "You forged my signature," I said. "You sold my home without my consent. That's not a family disagreement, Brandon. That's a felony." "You were sick," he snapped. "I did what I had to do to keep things going." "No, you did what you had to do to steal," I said. "And now you're going to learn what happens when you bet on someone dying." Silence. Then, "This is going to destroy us." "We're already destroyed," I replied. "You just didn't notice the cracks because you were too busy spending the money." He hung up. Evelyn glanced at me, her face unreadable. "You handled that well." "I've been handling things for 30 years, I said. He just didn't realize I was paying attention. That afternoon, the court granted our emergency motion. The funds, just over $197,000, were frozen, locked tight. Brandon wouldn't be buying any more shiny cars, no fancy dinners, no new electronics, not with my money. The buyer of the house, by the way, had been a friend of a friend, a shady cash buyer who didn't ask too many questions. But Evelyn was already in talks with the real estate board. With enough pressure, we could show the sale was voidable due to fraud. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was going to be fair. And this time, I had the leverage. By Monday, the phone calls started. Not from Brandon, he'd gone quiet after the account freeze, but from everyone around him. My sister, my cousin Lorraine, even one of Brandon's old high school teachers who apparently still kept in touch. Each one came with the same sugary preface. We're just concerned. Concerned, of course, not about the theft, the forgery, or the fact that Brandon had tried to erase me from my own life. No, they were concerned about the drama, the scandal, the unnecessary court mess, as if I had created this situation by refusing to just roll over and accept betrayal. I mean, he's your son, my sister Judith said over the phone, dragging out every word like it hurt her to speak. Do you really want this to be the legacy you leave behind? My legacy, I said. Judith, he sold my house while I was on a ventilator. Yes, but family is family. That line, the classic excuse. The rusty bandage slapped over every deep wound in a dysfunctional tree. Family is family. No, I said. Family is trust. Family is protection. Family doesn't cash out your home while you're unconscious and hope you never wake up. She went silent for a while. Then the true reason came out. He's scared, Margaret. He said he could go to jail. Good. Let him be scared. Let him lie awake every night wondering what's going to happen. I sure had. I'd lain in a hospital bed wondering if I'd ever get to walk again, wondering what I was waking up to. Fear was the one emotion Brandon and I now had in common, and he'd earned every ounce of it. Later that week, Lorraine dropped by the church I'd been visiting since my recovery. She brought a tin of cookies, sat next to me in the pew, and whispered, "Maybe you could settle, quietly. Just ask for some of the money back." I looked at her, not angry, not even sad, just tired. "It wasn't his to give me back," I said. She blinked. "But if you drop the charges—" "I'm not pressing charges, Lorraine," I said softly. "The court is. The moment he forged my name and submitted that POA, it stopped being a family matter. It became a crime." I don't think she really understood. Most of them didn't. Because for years, I had been the quiet one, the polite mother, the dependable aunt, the one who forgave the missed holidays, the broken promises, the late-night bailouts. But not anymore. Brandon had taught me something, in his own twisted way. He taught me that silence only protects the wrong people. And I was done being silent. The morning of the hearing, I wore navy blue. Not black. I wasn't mourning. And not gray. I wasn't fading into the background. Navy blue was strength. It said, "I am here, I am present, and I will be heard." The courthouse was one of those old brick buildings that had seen decades of stories, divorces, bankruptcies, custody battles, secrets aired under oath. I walked in slowly, supported by a cane, but with my head high. Evelyn was already inside, calm and composed as ever. She handed me a copy of the motion packet we'd submitted. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked. "I've never been more ready for anything," I replied. Brandon walked in 10 minutes late. He looked different. Not like the smug, polished son I'd seen leaning on his new car a few weeks ago. His face was pale, drawn. No flashy watch, hair slightly unkempt. But the part that struck me most? He wouldn't look at me. His attorney, some young man who looked fresh out of law school, stood beside him, flipping through documents with the kind of speed that screamed underprepared. When the judge entered, the room stilled. Judge Helen Ramirez, known locally as firm, fair, and allergic to nonsense. She adjusted her glasses, glanced over the files, and opened with, "Let's begin." Evelyn stood first. Her voice was crisp, confident, and cold as glass. She laid it all out: the timeline of my hospitalization, the medical records proving my incapacitation, the forged power of attorney, the rapid cash sale of the home, and the full deposit made into Brandon's account. Then she said something that made Brandon shift in his seat. "Your Honor, the respondent didn't simply act without consent. He exploited a period in which the petitioner was unable to object. This was not a mistake. This was a plan." Brandon's attorney scrambled. He tried to argue that there was familial misunderstanding, that Brandon had acted in good faith, that he believed he had verbal permission. Judge Ramirez cut him off. "Verbal permission is not legal authority, especially when the person you're claiming gave it was unconscious at the time." Then she turned to me. "Mrs. Dalton, is there anything you'd like to say for the record?" I stood. Not easily, not quickly, but on my own. "Yes," I said. "There's been a lot of talk about how this makes my son look, about what it means for our family. But no one asked how it felt to wake up in a hospital and find out your entire life was sold out from under you. I'm not doing this to punish him. I'm doing it to protect myself and to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else." The judge nodded slowly. "Thank you. That will be noted." When the hearing ended, the judge ordered a temporary injunction on any further use of the funds and scheduled a full evidentiary hearing in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. That was when the truth would be carved into public record. And Brandon, for the first time in his life, would have to answer for something he couldn't talk his way out of. A week after the hearing, Evelyn called me into her office. She had that look on her face. Not quite a smile, not quite concern, just a kind of tight-lipped satisfaction. The kind she wore when she'd uncovered something useful, but ugly. "We looked deeper into the buyer," she said, handing me a folder. I opened it. The name on the deed leapt out instantly: Derek Owens. Not someone I recognized, not at first. But then Evelyn slid a second sheet across the desk. A photo, Brandon and Derek, together, laughing, arms slung over each other's shoulders at some backyard barbecue. Date stamped just 6 months before I went into the hospital. "They're friends?" I asked slowly. "More than friends," Evelyn said. "They've known each other for years. They went to college together. Derek's been flipping properties in the area under different LLCs, sometimes cash, sometimes private lenders. Nothing overtly illegal, but shady enough to raise eyebrows." She leaned in slightly. "And get this. Derek paid well below market value for your house, almost 40% under." I stared at the numbers. My home of 27 years, sold for a fraction of its worth. Brandon hadn't just stolen it, he gave it away for fast cash. Or worse, he shared it. "Could it have been a setup?" I asked. Evelyn nodded slowly. "That's where we're heading. If we can prove collusion, we're not just talking about fraud anymore. We're talking about conspiracy." A chill crept up my spine. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a desperate son making a reckless choice. This was a plan, a calculated, deceitful plan that used my illness as the perfect cover. That evening, I sat in the spare bedroom of my friend's house and looked through old photo albums. Brandon as a boy. Brandon on his first day of high school. Brandon smiling on my porch with a backpack too big for his shoulders. I couldn't reconcile that little boy with the man who'd handed my life over to a buyer he knew would keep quiet. But I didn't let myself cry. Instead, I wrote. Every memory, every timeline, every suspicious text. I wrote it all down, a war journal for the battlefield ahead. The next day, Evelyn contacted the title company involved in the sale. Turns out, the notary on the power of attorney form had already been reported for questionable practices in the past. A pattern was forming, threads starting to pull together. We weren't just going to win back what was mine. We were going to expose the rot beneath it. This wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about every person like me who'd ever been told to let it go because it's family. And I wasn't letting anything go. Not now, not ever. 2 days after Evelyn filed the formal subpoena, the first crack in Brandon's story opened. It came in the form of a stamp, a small inked seal in the lower corner of the power of attorney document, the kind that's supposed to make a legal document feel official, permanent, except in this case, it was a lie. The notary listed was a woman named Karen McMillan, who supposedly witnessed me signing over authority to my son while I lay in a hospital bed with tubes down my throat. Karen was licensed, that part checked out. But when Evelyn contacted her office, the reaction was swift and surprising. I haven't notarized anything for a Margaret Dalton. Not ever, Karen said flatly. She was cooperative, even irritated. Said she'd never met my son, claimed the seal looked like hers, but the signature wasn't. When she sent over her notary log, a required record of every document she certifies, my name wasn't in it, not once. We sent that log straight to the court. Forgery of a notary seal is a felony. Combine that with forged signatures, an illegal property transfer, and frozen funds, and suddenly Brandon wasn't just walking into civil court anymore. He was knocking on the door of criminal charges. That night, Brandon called me again. Unknown number. I didn't pick up. He texted instead. "You're ruining my life, please. Let's just talk." Funny. I remember lying in the ICU, drugged and delirious, tubes in my arms, not knowing if I'd walk again, wondering if I'd ever go home. Meanwhile, he was signing documents in my name, transferring my entire world to someone he knew would flip it for profit. And now, I was ruining his life. No, Brandon. I was just preserving mine. The next morning, Evelyn sent over an update. Karen had agreed to testify. She'd appear before the judge with her log, her license, and a sworn affidavit denying the notarization. It was a slam dunk, and we weren't done. A private investigator Evelyn hired found that Brandon had recently applied for a luxury condo lease. Downtown, riverfront view, rejected after the freeze order was issued. He thought this was going to be his upgrade, his reward. Instead, he was back in a 2-bedroom apartment with nothing but debt and a crumbling story. For the first time, I started to feel something new, not anger, not revenge, clarity. I had given that boy everything I had, my time, my money, my trust. And now, finally, I was giving something to myself. A line, a boundary, a voice. One he couldn't talk over anymore. It arrived on a Thursday morning. No return address, just my name written in Brandon's unmistakable, slightly rushed handwriting. For a moment, I just stared at the envelope. I didn't want to open it. Part of me feared it would say something so manipulative, so familiar, that I'd feel that old pull, the motherly reflex to fix, to forgive. But I opened it anyway. The handwriting inside was uneven, like he'd written it quickly or under stress. "Mom, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I don't blame you. I messed up. I was desperate. I thought you weren't going to make it, and I panicked. I didn't know what else to do. The bills were piling up, and I thought, maybe the house could help both of us. I know I should have waited, should have asked, should have done it differently, but now everything's ruined. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I'm scared. Please don't take this to court. Please. I'll do whatever you ask. Just don't destroy me. There it was. Not an apology, a performance. Not once did he say, I knew it was wrong. Not once did he ask how I felt waking up homeless. Not once did he acknowledge the planning, the buyer, the fake notary. He was scared of the consequences, not sorry for the crime. And the most revealing line, don't destroy me. As if the destruction wasn't already done, to me. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not as a keepsake, as evidence. Later that evening, Evelyn called with more news. The court had reviewed the affidavit from the notary, and the judge was preparing to issue a formal fraud injunction against the sale. That meant we were one step closer to reversing the transfer entirely. I asked Evelyn if she'd seen anything like this before. Yes, she said, but rarely does the victim fight back this hard. Most people just give up, especially when it's their kid. I wasn't proud of the situation, but I was proud that I hadn't given up. Brandon thought he could play the long game, sell the house, move fast, and count on my silence. Count on me being too weak, too sick, too motherly to retaliate. He underestimated me. He forgot the life I built, not just the house, but the independence, the dignity, the boundaries I once let blur for him. Now I had my voice back, and I was going to use it, in court, in public, on paper, in testimony, until every lie was dragged into the light. The order came on a Monday afternoon, an official envelope stamped with the courthouse seal, delivered by certified mail. Inside, a temporary restraining order preventing any sale, lease, renovation, or use of the property at 1427 Woodridge Lane, my house. Technically still titled to Derek Owens. But legally? Now locked in place like a monument mid-collapse. I read it twice, then a third time, my hands trembling not with fear, but with the strange relief that comes when the fight finally hits real traction. Brandon couldn't touch it anymore. He couldn't collect rent, couldn't flip it, couldn't sell it to cover his legal bills. The house he so eagerly gutted me for was now untouchable. I called Evelyn immediately. We did it, she said simply. This is the first nail. The rest will come faster now. 2 days later, Derek's attorney filed a motion to withdraw from the case. Rumor had it Derek was furious. He hadn't known Brandon forged the power of attorney, or at least that's what he was now claiming. But Evelyn wasn't convinced. He knew enough to move fast, too fast, she said. He pushed the sale through in under 2 weeks. No inspections, no title insurance. It was meant to slide under the radar. Now, it wasn't just visible, it was immobilized. Meanwhile, Brandon went quiet. No texts, no letters, no fake apologies. But then came a curious email from a name I hadn't seen in years, Renee Hall. My former neighbor, still living 2 doors down from my old house. Maggie, I wasn't sure if I should write this, but Brandon's been at the house, more than once, just sitting in the driveway, sometimes late at night. He doesn't get out, just parks there for a while and leaves. I didn't know how to respond. Was it guilt? Was he mourning the life he thought he'd buy with my home? Or maybe he was still scheming. But I didn't waste time wondering. The next morning, Evelyn filed a no trespass order through the local sheriff's office. If he stepped foot on the property, he'd be removed by force. This was no longer emotional. It was procedural, legal, bound by ink and courtrooms, not tears and pleading letters. He wanted to play games with my life while I lay in a hospital bed. Now we were playing on my terms, and the board was resetting, piece by piece. It was bound to come. Still, when Evelyn forwarded me a scan of the official criminal complaint, I stared at it for a long time. My son's name, in black ink, under the header, State of Oregon versus Brandon Lee Dalton. Count 1, forgery in the first degree. Count 2, criminal possession of a forged instrument. Count 3, fraudulent transfer of real property. Count 4, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. It felt surreal, like I was reading about someone else's child, someone else's betrayal. But I wasn't. This was my son, my only child, the boy I raised, protected, sacrificed for, now named in a court filing as a defendant in a criminal case. He received the summons 2 days later. I know because he showed up at Evelyn's office, unannounced. She texted me immediately. "He's here. Do you want to speak with him?" I didn't reply. 5 minutes later, I told him no. He left angry, muttered something about fixing this another way. I felt a strange mixture of pain and power. Not triumph, I wasn't celebrating, but I was standing taller. For the first time in years, I wasn't bending to make room for his mistakes. The following week, the hearing was scheduled. A pre-trial arraignment. Brandon would have to appear before a judge and enter a plea. He lawyered up, of course, some expensive local defense attorney probably paid for with borrowed money or credit cards he never planned to pay off. I wasn't planning to attend that hearing. But then I woke up that morning, made a pot of coffee, and something inside me shifted. I put on the blue blazer I'd worn to my sister's funeral. I tied my hair back. I drove to the courthouse and sat in the back row, quiet, unannounced. And I watched as my son stood before a judge and said the words, "Not guilty, Your Honor." I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I simply watched, because I knew what was coming. Evelyn had gathered a mountain of evidence, the notary's testimony, the title company's inconsistencies, even the emails between Brandon and Derek, proof that the buyer wasn't just a stranger, but a partner in the plan. This wasn't going away, and he was finally beginning to realize that. Later that afternoon, I received another letter, handwritten again. But I didn't open it. I tucked it in a drawer beside the first one. Because at this point, his words meant nothing. Only actions did now. He found me at a grocery store parking lot, of all places. I was loading bags into my trunk when a dark gray SUV pulled in beside me. The window rolled down, and I recognized the man behind the wheel instantly. Derek Owens, the buyer, the man who purchased my house for cash while I was unconscious in a hospital. "Mrs. Dalton?" he called out. I didn't answer, just stared. He stepped out slowly, dressed well, too well. Tailored jacket, watch that probably cost more than my entire hospital stay. Clean cut, polished. But beneath it, he looked tired, nervous. "I don't want any trouble," he said quickly. "I just wanted to talk." I crossed my arms. "You bought stolen property," I said. "There's nothing to talk about." He held up his hands. "Look, I didn't know it was stolen. Your son, Brandon, he told me you had dementia, that you couldn't manage the property anymore. He showed me papers, doctor's notes. Fake ones, I'm sure. Even if that were true," I said, "you closed on a home in 12 days. No title insurance, no inspection. Who does that?" He hesitated. "It was a good deal." "Right, a predatory one." He took a step closer. "I just want to make this right. I've already lost my attorney over this. My name's being flagged with the real estate board. If this goes to trial, I'm screwed." "Then maybe you shouldn't have made a deal with a desperate thief," I said. He looked around the lot, like someone might be watching or listening. Then, lower voice, "What if I offered to void the sale? voluntarily, in exchange for a non-disparagement clause. You stopped the press. No interviews, no statements, no lawsuits. Just let me walk away. I laughed. I couldn't help it. I almost died, Mr. Owens, I said, my voice sharper now. While your good deal was being inked, I was intubated. And now, you want silence? He didn't respond. So I continued. No, you don't get silence. You don't get dignity without accountability. You want to make it right? Give me your cooperation. Testify. Admit you knew the timeline was shady. Help take Brandon down. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw it. Genuine hesitation. Like a man standing on a ledge, realizing no deal was coming to save him. I'll think about it, he said, stepping back into his SUV. You do that, I replied. Time's ticking. As he pulled away, I could see it in his eyes. Regret. Not over what he did, over getting caught. Do you know about the line of credit? Evelyn's voice was calm, but the words hit like cold water. I was in her office, surrounded by manila folders and evidence packets, when she handed me a printout. It showed a $75,000 home equity line of credit, pulled against my house just 2 weeks before Brandon sold it. He'd squeezed every dollar he could from it. That was before the sale? I asked, already knowing the answer. Correct, she nodded. It appears he forged your signature on the loan documents. We're getting handwriting analysis now. I stared at the page. $75,000. It wasn't just the house. He'd bled it before letting go of the corpse. Quietly, strategically. Evelyn laid out the timeline. Early March, Brandon applies for the HELOC, uses fake ID verification. Mid-March, line of credit approved, funds withdrawn in 3 separate transfers. Late March, title transfer begins. April 1st, I'm hospitalized. April 3rd, house sold. April 10th, Brandon disappears with the money. All while I lay in a sterile room with machines breathing for me. It was no longer just fraud. This was premeditated financial assault. Can we prove intent? I asked. Evelyn didn't even blink. We don't need to prove intent for the fraud charges. But if we want grand larceny added to the criminal docket, yes, and this timeline helps. She flipped to another document, a series of bank statements from Brandon's personal accounts. Somehow, he'd opened 2 offshore accounts, one in the Caymans, the other in Belize. And though the balances were now nearly empty, there had been over $60,000 moved through them in under 30 days. Fast money, dirty trails. But why? I asked, more to myself than her. Why would he do this to his own mother? Evelyn answered without pause. Because he never thought you'd survive, and if you did, he counted on you forgiving him. That landed hard. Not just the betrayal, but the confidence behind it. He gambled my life against his greed and thought he'd win either way. Either I'd die and he'd walk away wealthy, or I'd live and he'd manipulate his way out of it, like always. But that era was over. I looked at the stack of evidence. I saw the numbers, the signatures, the patterns. It no longer felt like a son's mistake. It felt like what it was, a crime. And I was no longer the grieving mother. I was the prosecution's best witness. The email came late on a Wednesday night. Subject line, plea offer discussion, Brandon Dalton. It was from Brandon's defense attorney, a sleek, corporate-looking man named Malcolm Reed. I'd seen him once at the preliminary hearing, briefcase polished, tie too tight, walking with the confidence of someone used to burying problems in paperwork. Evelyn called me the next morning. He's fishing, she said flatly, testing to see how desperate we are. We weren't, but we agreed to hear him out, officially, through the DA's office. A meeting was scheduled in a downtown conference room, No courtroom, no cameras, just 4 people, Evelyn and I on one side, Malcolm and an assistant district attorney on the other. Malcolm spoke first. My client is prepared to accept responsibility, partially, in exchange for reduced sentencing and deferred restitution. I raised an eyebrow. Partially? He nodded, as if he were being generous. Brandon admits to misrepresenting his authority in the sale of the home. However, he maintains that he believed he had verbal consent to act on his mother's behalf. Evelyn laughed, a short, sharp sound. Your client forged a notarized power of attorney and stole $75,000 in equity, she snapped. Verbal consent doesn't cover felonies. Malcolm adjusted his cufflinks. We're hoping for 18 months of supervised probation and mandatory financial counseling. I spoke then, calm but firm. No. Malcolm blinked. Excuse me? No deals. Not unless he pleads guilty to everything. The forgery, the HELOC, the offshore accounts, every single transaction. Full confession, on record, under oath. He leaned back in his chair. That would destroy him. I didn't look away. He already destroyed me. There was silence. The assistant DA finally spoke. Then we proceed to trial. And just like that, the deal crumbled. After the meeting, Evelyn and I walked out into the gray Portland afternoon. She handed me a paper coffee cup and smiled, just slightly. You did good in there. I shook my head. I didn't do anything. I just told the truth. That's more than most do, she said. We stood by her car a moment, watching traffic pass. Somewhere out there, Brandon was probably screaming into a pillow, furious that his charm didn't work, that he couldn't sweet-talk his way out of court like he always had out of detention or rent or responsibility. But this wasn't a lecture. This was a reckoning, and it was only getting started. The call came just after 9 p.m. I was folding laundry in the quiet of my living room, letting the soft hum of the dryer fill the silence, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something nudged me to pick up. Hello? There was a pause, then a voice, soft, a little shaky. Hi, is this Margaret Dalton? I felt my stomach tighten. Yes, who's this? You don't know me. My name's Elise Monroe. I knew your son, Brandon. I sat down. I'm sorry, she continued quickly. I didn't know what he did to you. I just read about the court case, and when I saw your name, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I took a breath. What do you mean? There was a beat of silence. Then, he did the same thing to me. The words hit like a hammer. Elise explained everything. A few years ago, she and Brandon had dated, casually at first, then more seriously. She was recently divorced, vulnerable, with a modest inheritance left by her father. Brandon swooped in like he always did, charming, helpful, full of dreams about building a life together. He convinced me to put money into a real estate startup he was launching, she said. Said we'd be partners, that we'd flip homes and get rich. She wired him $38,000. Within 3 months, he ghosted her, changed his number, closed the business account, disappeared. No contact, no apology, just silence. I never reported it, she admitted. I was embarrassed. My friends warned me. My sister hated him. I didn't want to admit they were right. I closed my eyes. I knew that feeling, that deep, aching denial we bury ourselves in to protect the people we love. Elise offered to share documents, emails, wire transfer receipts, even a voice recording she'd saved where Brandon promised her a return within 90 days. When she sent them to Evelyn the next day, we knew it was gold. Not just for the civil case, for the criminal trial. It painted a pattern, a history of fraud, emotional manipulation, and financial deceit. It proved Brandon wasn't a desperate son who made a one-time mistake. He was a predator with a playbook, And now, he'd left a witness trail. Evelyn said it best when she finished reviewing the files. He just lost the jury. I stared at Elise's email one more time, heart heavy but strangely hopeful. Because for the first time I realized I wasn't alone. I hadn't seen my son in 6 months. Not since the hospital. Not since I found out he sold my home, drained my equity, and left me with nothing but debt and paperwork. So when I opened the front door that evening and saw him standing there, eyes sunken, hoodie pulled over his head, my hand instinctively tightened on the doorframe. "Mom," he said quietly. I didn't move. "What are you doing here?" I asked. He glanced over his shoulder, as if making sure no one had followed him. His voice was low, guarded. "Can I come in? Just for a second?" I hesitated. Everything in me screamed no. But part of me, that fragile part that still remembered rocking him to sleep, baking his birthday cakes, cheering at Little League games, stepped aside. He walked in like a ghost, thin and tired, with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He didn't look like the boy I raised, or even the man I once hoped he'd become. He looked like someone lost in a storm of his own making. "Nice place," he mumbled, glancing around the rental, smaller than the house. I said nothing. He sat down on the edge of the couch, hands clasped like a kid about to confess. But I'd learned better than to fall for that posture. "I messed up," he finally said. That much, at least, was true. He continued. "I was broke. Things were falling apart. The debt collectors were after me, and I thought, maybe if I could just get a fresh start." "You stole my house," I interrupted. "My savings. You forged my name, lied to the bank, lied to me." "I know," he whispered. I didn't think you'd wake up." There it was, the real truth, the cold calculus behind it all. He hadn't just gambled with my finances, he gambled with my life. I sat down across from him. "So what do you want now?" He looked up. There was no tears, no remorse. "If I testify against the buyer, maybe the court will go easier on me." I laughed, bitter, sharp. "You're not here because you're sorry. You're here to negotiate." He didn't deny it. "I'm your son," he said softly, as if that word still had value. "We could fix this." I stood up. "No, Brandon. I'm fixing it. You're facing it. There's a difference." He sat there a moment longer, like he didn't know what to say, like the reality was finally sinking in. Then he left, quietly, without slamming the door, without looking back. And for the first time, I didn't cry. Because I knew something now with absolute clarity. I didn't lose a son that year. I saw who he really was. And the healing had finally begun. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, though the air conditioning hummed overhead, but in atmosphere. The kind of sterile stillness that makes your heart beat louder in your ears. Polished wood, worn benches, a judge who looked both bored and slightly irritated by the delay in proceedings. Brandon sat across the room at the defendant's table. His lawyer sat beside him, flipping through papers like it was just another Tuesday. Brandon didn't look at me. I was called to the stand just after 10 a.m. A bailiff guided me up the steps. I took the oath with a raised hand, my voice steady despite the tremble in my fingertips. When I sat down and looked out over the jury box, it struck me. They didn't know anything about me. Not really. They didn't know the holidays I spent baking pies in that kitchen, the way I used to sing while pruning my garden, how I refinanced the house once to pay for Brandon's college, or how I'd cried in that very same kitchen when I thought he was using again, only to realize too late that what I should have feared more was his sobriety, his clarity, his ambition without empathy. But I would tell them. The prosecutor, a woman named Jill, asked me to explain what happened. From the day I entered the hospital to the day I found out my life had been sold from under me. I spoke clearly, factually. No tears, no theatrics. But when she asked how I felt when I found out my home was gone, my voice cracked once. It wasn't just a house, I said, forcing my gaze to Brandon for the first time. It was where I built my life, where I raised my son. I trusted him with everything, and he took it. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge looked up from his notes. Brandon shifted uncomfortably in his seat, jaw clenched. Jill continued with documents, forged signatures, power of attorney forms, loan withdrawals. Every piece of evidence was like a stone added to the weight on his back. I saw it in his eyes, the dawning realization that charm and excuses wouldn't save him now. Then came the defense's turn. Brandon's lawyer tried to paint the picture of a misunderstood son acting out of panic. He believed, the lawyer said, that his mother would want the house sold to cover medical expenses, that he was saving her, not stealing from her. I leaned forward into the microphone. Did I look like I asked for that help while I was unconscious? He didn't try to save me. He bet against me. That line held. Even a juror nodded. By the time I stepped down, I wasn't shaking anymore. I didn't feel small. I felt like myself again, the woman who built her life from nothing, who raised a son alone, and who now stood not just for justice, but for truth. The gavel echoed as the judge adjourned for lunch. Outside the courthouse, Evelyn patted my arm. "You gave them what they needed," she said. "Now it's just a matter of time." And for once, time felt like it was on my side. If my testimony gave the jury the skeleton of what Brandon had done, Elise's gave them the flesh and blood. She took the stand the next morning. Dressed in a simple navy blouse and black slacks, she looked composed but emotionally burdened. The kind of strength that comes not from confidence, but from surviving something you swore you'd never talk about again. Brandon went stiff the second she walked into the courtroom. His eyes widened just slightly, a crack in the mask, and I knew then he hadn't expected her to show up. The prosecutor, Jill, wasted no time. "Elise, can you tell the court how you came to know Mr. Dalton?" She nodded, clearing her throat. "We met 4 years ago, at a networking mixer in Eugene. He introduced himself as a real estate investor looking for backers, said he was building something life-changing. And did you invest?" "I did," she said quietly. $38,000. It was money from my father's inheritance." A low murmur stirred from the jury box. Did he deliver on his promises? No. Within 2 months he ghosted me. The company dissolved. Emails bounced. He changed phone numbers. I filed a small claims case but dropped it. I didn't think I had a chance. She paused, looking straight at Brandon. And I was embarrassed. I'd believed him, trusted him. He made me feel like I was building a future, not funding a scam. Brandon's attorney tried to discredit her, of course. He brought up the fact that she never followed through with legal action, asked why she waited years to come forward, tried to paint her as a spurned lover out for revenge. But Elise held her ground with quiet dignity. "I didn't come here to get revenge. I came because your client does this to people. And if I'd spoken up back then, maybe his own mother wouldn't be sitting here today." That landed hard. Even the judge leaned forward slightly. Afterward, during a short recess, Elise and I crossed paths in the hallway. We didn't say much, just a small nod between two women who understood each other in a way no one else in that courtroom could. Brandon's world was unraveling, thread by thread. This wasn't just about fraud anymore. It was about who he was and how many people he was willing to hurt to get what he wanted. The jury was seeing it. So was the press. By that afternoon, articles were already circulating. Man accused of stealing mother's house has pattern of financial manipulation, says former girlfriend. It was no longer a family dispute. It was a pattern of predation. And the more he tried to control the story, the more it slipped through his fingers. I didn't expect him to take the stand. Most defendants don't, especially when they've got a past like Brandon's, one riddled with half-truths, broken promises, and financial footprints impossible to erase. But there he was. Buttoned shirt, clean shave, rehearsed demeanor. It was a gamble, and it reeked of desperation. The courtroom stiffened as he was sworn in. A few jurors leaned forward slightly, curious. Others looked skeptical. He smiled, just a little, like he was trying to be relatable. Human. Brandon, his attorney began gently, why did you sell the house? He sighed like he'd been carrying the weight of the world. My mom was dying, at least I thought she was. I panicked. There were bills stacking up, debt collectors calling. I didn't see another way. He looked over at me, carefully, measured. She was always so independent, proud. I thought if I could take care of it without burdening her, maybe it would be easier. It was good. Too good. Well delivered. Emotional. Almost convincing. Almost. But then came the cross-examination. Jill approached slowly, calm but deliberate. Mr. Dalton, are you aware that your mother had a fully paid-up insurance policy designed to cover her hospital expenses? Brandon blinked. No. She slid a document toward him. It was mailed to your home 2 weeks before the sale went through. You signed for it. He paused. I don't remember that. She didn't even look up from her folder. Do you also not remember logging into her bank account 3 days before the sale, transferring money to your own, and purchasing a used BMW 2 days after? He shifted in his seat. That wasn't... I didn't think... And how about the emails you sent to the buyer's attorney saying, and I quote, let's fast-track the paperwork. My mom won't be around much longer? He looked stunned. Jill let the silence hang. The jurors were scribbling. Brandon tried to recover, leaning forward. I made mistakes, but I didn't mean to hurt her. Jill raised her eyes slowly. You sold your unconscious mother's home, forged her signature, bought a car, wired money to a private crypto wallet, then tried to frame it as charity. And then, the moment that broke whatever illusion he'd built, you didn't panic, Mr. Dalton. You planned it. Silence. Even the judge gave a small shake of his head, subtle but damning. Brandon looked down. His mouth opened once, twice, but no sound came. The mask cracked. He wasn't a son trying to save his mother. He was a con man caught mid-play, and for the first time, he knew the jury saw it too. The courtroom was quieter than usual that day. The air had shifted. Brandon's testimony had drained whatever doubt remained. The jury had seen through him. His charm had cracked wide open, and beneath it was a man who thought his mother's life was a loophole he could exploit. They were deliberating now. The judge sent everyone home for the afternoon. He said it might take hours. It could take days. Evelyn and I walked out together, the echo of our heels bouncing off the marble floors. I was too exhausted to feel anxious, just numb, worn down to the grain. Then my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Local. I answered anyway. Mrs. Dalton, this is Julia Marks from Whitestone Property Group. I represent the buyers who purchased your house. My throat tightened. I stopped walking. Yes, I said cautiously. I wanted to reach out personally. I've been following the case, and frankly, we had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. I stayed silent. The sale wasn't illegal, on paper. Your son had the power of attorney forms, the documentation, but ethically, We don't want any part of stolen property, especially not from someone in your position." I blinked. "Are you saying we're willing to rescind the sale?" The street faded around me. Cars passed. Evelyn paused beside me, brows raised. But I couldn't speak just yet. Julia continued, "We're happy to return ownership of the house. We'll eat the legal fees, the closing costs. We just want this out of our hands, but you'll have to file for civil reclamation through the county. I can send the paperwork today." A part of me didn't know how to feel. For months, that house had felt like a tomb, a symbol of betrayal. Every memory inside it, my garden, the stained glass window Brandon broke with a baseball at age 9, the notches on the wall marking his growth, had been stripped from me. And now, it was possible to have it all back. I hung up slowly and turned to Evelyn. "They're giving it back," I said. She didn't respond right away, just touched my arm. "It's not just a house anymore, is it?" I shook my head. It had become a symbol, not of what I lost, but of what I'd taken back. That night, I sat on the porch of the rental with a cup of tea and filled out every form Julia sent over. Reclamation paperwork, county filings, title transfer requests. By sunrise, it was official. I wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. I was reclaiming what was mine, brick by brick, signature by signature. And this time, I would be the one writing the ending. We were called back to court the next morning. The jury had reached a decision faster than anyone expected, less than 12 hours. That kind of speed spoke volumes. I felt it in the quiet shuffle of feet, in the way people whispered in the gallery. Evelyn gripped my hand as we entered the courtroom. Brandon sat already at the defendant's table, eyes forward, face pale. He didn't look at me. I don't think he could. The judge entered. The bailiff called order. "Madam Foreperson," the judge said, "has the jury reached a verdict?" A woman in her early 50s stood. She didn't hesitate. "We have, Your Honor. We find the defendant, Brandon Dalton, guilty of financial elder abuse, fraud, and falsifying legal documents." There was no sound in the courtroom, just that one word echoing in my ears. Guilty. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt still, settled, like a door quietly closing behind me. The judge nodded solemnly and addressed the room. "Sentencing will be scheduled in 30 days. Defendant is to remain in custody without bail." Brandon flinched at that. For the first time, his mask broke fully. He turned toward me as the bailiff approached him. "You ruined my life," he said under his breath. I stood and looked him in the eye. "No," I replied calmly. "You did that all on your own." They led him out in cuffs. I watched until the door swung shut behind him. Later that day, I stood in the county clerk's office with my official deed in hand. My name, restored. My home, mine again. And for a few days, it felt like the end. Until the letter came, typed, plain, no return address. It was from Brandon's new attorney, someone fresh, aggressive. Inside was a notice of intent to appeal. He was claiming misrepresentation of legal authority and ineffective counsel. I stared at the paper for a long time. It wasn't that I feared losing again. The facts were against him. It was that he couldn't let go. Even now, stripped of his lies, exposed for what he'd done, he was trying to claw something back, not because he wanted justice, but because he couldn't stand not winning. I took the letter, folded it gently, and placed it in a folder marked Brandon Final. Then I called my lawyer. "Let him appeal," I said. "I'm not afraid of him anymore." Because the truth was simple. He couldn't take anything from me now. Not my name, not my home, not my peace. And this time, I would be the one writing the last chapter. They scheduled the appeal hearing for a Tuesday morning. I arrived early, earlier than I needed to, and sat quietly in the hallway, breathing in the silence of the courthouse. I wasn't here to fight anymore. I was here to finish. The room was smaller this time, fewer people, no jury, no media, just a panel of 3 appellate judges, a few attorneys, and the man who'd tried to sell away my life like it was a used car. Brandon looked thinner than before. The jumpsuit hung a little looser. He didn't make eye contact with me this time. His new lawyer stood with the energy of a man who thought he could out-argue gravity. "Your Honors," he began, "we contend that Mr. Dalton did not receive competent representation during the original trial, and that key context about his family relationship and mental state was omitted." He went on about Brandon's conflicted emotions, about how my illness had caused emotional distress that supposedly affected Brandon's judgment. I didn't react. I didn't blink, because the truth doesn't flinch. Then it was my turn. The court allowed me to speak, not as a witness, but as the person most impacted. I stood slowly, stepped to the center of the courtroom, and faced the judges. "I don't need to rehash what happened," I said. "You've read the transcripts. You know what he did. I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm here to say that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and closure doesn't mean silence." I turned slightly, looking not at the judges, but at Brandon. "You took something from me I didn't even realize could be taken, not just my home. You took my trust. You took my pride. You took my memories and tried to sell them off like they didn't mean anything." He blinked, swallowed. "But here's the part you don't understand, Brandon. I survived. You underestimated me. You thought I'd stay broken, quiet, afraid. But I got back up. I found my voice. And I'll never let anyone take it from me again, especially not you." I turned back to the panel. "I ask that you deny this appeal, not because I want revenge, but because justice was already served, and there's nothing left for this court to correct." Silence. Then the head judge gave a small nod. "Thank you, Mrs. Dalton." I walked back to my seat, taller, stronger, finished. 20 minutes later, the decision was handed down. Appeal denied. Final judgment stands. Brandon would serve his sentence, and I would go home. Not to a house built of bricks and wood, but to a life rebuilt from truth, resilience, and dignity. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the time away, or maybe it was me, no longer viewing it through the lens of someone clinging to the past. I stood at the end of the walkway with the keys in my hand, staring at the door I never thought I'd see again from this angle. No locks had been changed, no boards on the windows, just ivy that had grown a little too wild and flower beds that needed love again. I stepped inside slowly. The air was different, not stale, but unfamiliar, the kind of silence a place holds when it hasn't been lived in, not just occupied, but truly lived in. I walked through the rooms, kitchen, living room, the hallway with faded pencil marks on the wall where Brandon's height had once been charted. They were still there, ghosts of something that used to be real. I thought I'd cry, but I didn't. Instead, I opened every window and let the summer air rush in. I didn't move fast. I didn't rush to clean or fix or fill the empty spaces. I made a cup of tea, sat on the back porch, and just listened. Birds, wind, the faint hum of life beyond the fence line. This was mine, every square foot, every imperfection, every memory and scar. Not because I'd fought for it, but because I'd healed in spite of what had been done to me. The garden would bloom again, the walls would get a fresh coat of paint, and maybe someday laughter would echo through the hallways again, from family, from friends, from the life I'd slowly start rebuilding. But today, Today was about stillness, about knowing that the woman who had entered that hospital bed months ago, sick, vulnerable, unaware, was not the woman who lived here now. She had learned to draw boundaries, to speak truth, to walk away when needed, to return when it mattered. Brandon's sentence would begin soon. He'd serve his time, maybe try to write me letters I'd never read. But he was no longer the center of my story. I was. I closed my eyes and let the breeze lift the edges of my cardigan. For the first time in a long time, there was no weight on my chest. Only breath, only peace, only home. The end.